Your daily shower routine would have made even the wealthiest Roman senator weep with envy. That's right. The civilization that conquered most of the known world, built aqueducts that still function today, and created architectural marvels couldn't figure out how to properly wash their hair without using fermented urine. While you casually brush your teeth with mint-flavored paste, Romans across the empire were scrubbing theirs with crushed mouse brains and hoping for the best. And that expensive bottle of shampoo sitting in your bathroom, it would have been worth more than a Roman soldier's annual salary. Before we continue deeper into these ancient shadows, take a quiet moment to subscribe if these forgotten stories bring you peace. And if you're still drifting with us, let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. It's always fascinating to see who joins us from around the world as we wander through history's quieter moments, because soap as we know it simply didn't exist. Welcome to the paradoxical world of Roman hygiene, where the most advanced civilization in human history somehow managed to make getting clean a daily exercise in creative suffering. Picture this. It's dawn in the Eternal City, circa 150 AD, and across the sprawling metropolis of Rome, nearly 1 million people are about to begin their daily battle against dirt, disease, and their own bodies. From the cramped, reeking apartments of the Suburra district to the marble-columned villas on the Palatine Hill, every Roman, whether slave or senator, prostitute or priestess, will spend the next several hours engaged in elaborate rituals designed to achieve something we accomplish in 20 minutes with hot water and soap. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. The Romans, for all their engineering genius and military precision, had somehow created a hygiene system that was simultaneously the most sophisticated and most revolting in the ancient world. They built public baths that could accommodate thousands of people, yet filled them with water that would make a medieval peasant gag. They developed complex beauty treatments using ingredients sourced from across their vast empire, then mixed them with human waste and called it medicine. They obsessed over personal cleanliness while living in cities where raw sewage flowed through the streets and rats the size of small dogs were considered normal household residents. Let's start with the most fundamental difference between Roman hygiene and ours. They had no soap. None. The closest thing to soap that existed was a mixture called suppo, made from goat fat and wood ash, but it was primarily used for washing clothes, not bodies. For personal cleaning, Romans relied on a substance they believed was far superior to any cleaning agent we could imagine: olive oil. Not the kind you drizzle on your salad. We're talking about thick, often rancid oil that was slathered onto the skin and then scraped off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, taking dirt, sweat, and frequently a few layers of skin along with it. This oil and scrape method wasn't just used by the poor who couldn't afford better alternatives. Even Marcus Aurelius Gaius Fortunatus, the wealthiest grain merchant in all of Gaul, subjected himself to this daily flaying because Romans genuinely believed it was the pinnacle of personal hygiene. The richer you were, the more expensive your oil, and the more ornate your strigil, but the basic principle remained the same. Coat yourself in grease, then scrape it off like you're preparing a fish for dinner. Now imagine trying to get truly clean this way. You wake up in your bed, whether it's a straw mattress crawling with bed bugs in a fifth-floor tenement or a silk-covered couch in a Tiburtine villa, and you're already starting the day with whatever parasites decided to make you their midnight snack. Fleas were so common that most Romans had stopped noticing the constant itching. Lice were practically a fashion accessory, and those were just the external parasites. Intestinal worms were so universal that physicians considered a person without them to be unnaturally healthy. Your first challenge of the day, your teeth. While you might grab a toothbrush and paste flavored with mint or cinnamon, a Roman's options were considerably more creative. The wealthy might use powdered pumice stone mixed with honey to scrub their teeth, which had the dual effect of removing plaque and gradually filing their teeth down to nubs. The middle classes often opted for crushed pearls or corals, expensive, painful and completely ineffective. But the truly desperate poor had access to what Roman physicians swore was the most effective tooth whitener available: fresh human urine. Yes, you read that correctly. Roman medical texts seriously recommended rinsing your mouth with piss, ideally from a young person or someone with a particularly healthy constitution. Portuguese urine was considered especially potent, though historians still debate whether this was due to diet, genetics, or simply clever marketing by Portuguese merchants. The ammonia in urine does have some whitening properties, but it also destroys tooth enamel and leaves your mouth tasting like, well, exactly what you'd expect. For hair care, the situation was equally bizarre. Roman women, particularly those of the upper classes, were obsessed with elaborate hairstyles that required hours of daily maintenance and frequently involved hairpieces made from the scalps of conquered Germanic tribes. These towering confections were held in place with a mixture of bear grease, flower extracts, and sometimes crushed beetles for color. The weight of these hairstyles often caused severe neck problems, and the combination of grease and dead insects created perfect breeding grounds for parasites. Roman men weren't spared this follicular nightmare either. Baldness was considered so shameful that emperors like Julius Caesar would spend fortunes on remedies involving everything from ground horse teeth to fresh bear bile. One popular treatment required wrapping the head in a mixture of chicken droppings and wine, then sitting in the sun for several hours. The results were predictably disappointing, but Roman optimism about miracle cures was apparently infinite. The social hierarchy of hygiene was perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Roman cleanliness culture. A wealthy patrician like Gaius Helvetius Maximus might spend 3 hours each morning in elaborate grooming rituals involving specialized slaves for each body part, exotic oils imported from India, and bathing water heated to precise temperatures. Meanwhile, his neighbor Lucius Porcius Desperatus, a freed slave working as a baker, would be lucky to splash some cold water on his face and change his tunic once a week. But here's the truly remarkable thing. Despite these vast differences in resources and ritual, everyone in Roman society was ultimately dealing with the same fundamental problems. Rich or poor, patrician or plebeian, everyone was fighting a losing battle against body odor, dental decay, and parasites. The wealthy just fought it with more expensive weapons. And this was just the beginning of their day. As the Roman sun climbs higher over the 7 hills, our various citizens, from the senator's pampered wife to the gladiator preparing for the arena, will embark on hygiene rituals that are by turns fascinating, revolting, and completely alien to modern sensibilities. They'll visit public baths that serve as everything from social clubs to brothels. They'll apply makeup containing enough lead to kill a horse, and they'll engage in grooming practices that would make a medieval barber surgeon seem sophisticated by comparison. Welcome to Rome, where getting clean was never simple, rarely effective, and always an adventure in creative problem solving. The greatest empire in human history couldn't conquer body odor, but they certainly tried. You awaken to what Romans called the salutatio urbis, mine, the greeting of the city, though it's less a greeting and more a cacophonous assault on every sense you possess. The sound begins before dawn, roosters crowing from rooftops, vendors already hawking their wares in the streets below, the rumble of wooden wheels on stone as carts deliver goods before the day's traffic restrictions take effect. But underneath these familiar urban sounds is something else entirely. The morning symphony of a million people simultaneously relieving themselves in whatever container, corner, or courtyard happens to be convenient. If you're Marcus Brutus Lucionus, a mid-level government clerk sleeping in a modest domus near the Campus Martius. You're awakened by the gentle splash of water from your private fountain and the soft footsteps of your single household slave, Gaius, preparing your morning ablutions. The air in your bedroom carries the pleasant scent of the herb garden just outside your window, mixed with the faint aroma of yesterday's dinner, roasted peacock with honey and garum sauce. But if you're Quintus Miserius Unfortunatus, a leather worker squeezed into a third-floor apartment in one of Rome's towering insulae, your morning begins very differently. The building creaks and groans like a ship in a storm, as your upstairs neighbors, a family of 6 sharing a single room, begin their daily routine. The thin wooden floors transmit every footstep, every cough, every intimate moment from the dozens of families packed into this precarious structure. The smell wafting up through the floorboards is a complex bouquet of human waste, rotting food scraps, unwashed bodies, and the smoky residue from countless oil lamps and cooking fires. Your first conscious thought, regardless of your social station, is probably about your bladder. Unlike our modern luxury of private bathrooms, Romans had to plan their morning relief based on their social status and living arrangements. The wealthy might have a private latrine connected to the city's sewer system, essentially a marble seat positioned over a channel of flowing water. The less fortunate made do with chamber pots that would need to be emptied later, hopefully not out the nearest window, though Roman laws specifically prohibiting this practice suggest it happened with alarming frequency. For the truly unfortunate residents of the upper floors of insulae, morning relief might involve a treacherous journey down narrow, steep stairs to a communal latrine in the building's courtyard. These facilities were shared by dozens of people and cleaned, if you could call it that, by whoever drew the short straw that week. The stench alone was enough to discourage lingering, which was probably for the best since the stone or wooden seats were rarely cleaned and often crawling with parasites. But here's where Roman engineering genius shines through even in the most basic human functions. The city's sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, was a marvel of urban planning that wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. Built originally to drain the swamps between Rome's 7 hills, it had evolved into a sophisticated network that carried waste from across the city directly into the Tiber River. The problem was access. Only the wealthy could afford homes connected to this system. As consciousness fully returns, you become aware of your body's condition after a night of Roman sleep. If you're fortunate enough to be Livia Sophisticator, wife of a successful olive oil merchant, you've spent the night on a comfortable bed stuffed with goose down, covered in linen sheets that are changed weekly by your household slaves. Your biggest complaint might be a few flea bites, since even the wealthiest Romans couldn't completely escape these ubiquitous pests. But if you're one of the millions of ordinary Romans, you've just spent 8 hours on a straw mattress that hasn't been properly cleaned in months, covered by a wool blanket that doubles as a breeding ground for lice and fleas. Your body bears the evidence of the night's battles, red welts from bedbug bites, scratch marks from fleas, and possibly the telltale rash of scabies if you've been particularly unlucky. The straw in your mattress has begun to rot from repeated exposure to sweat and other bodily fluids, creating a sour, musty odor that clings to your skin and hair. Your mouth tastes like you've been chewing on a leather sandal soaked in vinegar, partly because you probably have been breathing through your mouth all night to avoid the various smells of your living situation, and partly because Roman dental hygiene was, to put it charitably, a work in progress. The wine you drank last night, and every Roman drank wine, since water was often unsafe, has left your mouth dry and your breath capable of wilting flowers at 20 paces. Your hair, if you're a woman, is a disaster requiring immediate attention. Roman women's hairstyles were elaborate architectural achievements held in place with a combination of grease, wax, and prayer. After a night of tossing and turning, these constructions often resembled the aftermath of a small earthquake. The hairpins have shifted, the false braids have come loose, and the entire edifice threatens to collapse at any moment. For Roman men, hair presented different but equally pressing challenges. Balding was considered such a sign of physical and moral weakness that men would go to extraordinary lengths to conceal it. Some wore wigs made from the hair of Germanic slaves, which had to be carefully arranged each morning to avoid detection. Others used a paste made from bear grease and ground pearls to encourage hair growth, creating a sticky, expensive mess that attracted flies and had roughly the same success rate as modern weight loss supplements. But perhaps the most immediate concern facing any Roman upon waking was the state of their skin. Without modern understanding of hygiene or access to effective cleaning products, skin conditions were endemic. Acne wasn't just a teenage problem. It persisted well into adulthood and was treated with remedies that often made the condition worse. Popular treatments included applying a paste made from crushed snails and wine, rubbing the affected area with sulfur and tar, or the ever-popular solution of washing with aged urine. Eczema, psoriasis, and various fungal infections were so common that most Romans considered them normal parts of life. The wealthy might consult expensive Greek physicians who prescribed treatments involving rare herbs and animal parts, while the poor made do with folk remedies passed down through generations, most of which involved applying something revolting to the affected area and hoping for the best. As you lie there contemplating the day ahead, you can hear the city of Rome coming to life around you. Street vendors are already calling out their wares, though what they're selling might surprise modern sensibilities. Fresh urine, collected this morning, shouts one vendor, hawking his product to textile workers who used it for cleaning and dyeing cloth. Another calls out, garum, the finest fish sauce in all of Rome, referring to the fermented fish gut condiment that served as the ketchup of the ancient world and smelled roughly like low tide in hell. The morning light filtering through your window, if you're lucky enough to have one mind, reveals the true scope of your daily hygiene challenges. Your clothes from yesterday are wrinkled, stained with wine and food, and permeated with the smell of wood smoke from cooking fires. Your body is coated in a film of sweat, oil, and the general grime that accumulates when your primary cleaning method involves scraping yourself with a metal tool. The moment your feet hit the floor, whether it's imported marble, simple wooden planks, or just packed earth, depending on your station, you're immediately confronted with the first major decision of your Roman day. Which of your various hygiene catastrophes requires the most urgent attention? This isn't a simple matter of hopping in the shower and brushing your teeth. This is strategic planning worthy of a military campaign, because in Rome, getting clean was quite literally a battle against your own body, and your body was usually winning. If you're Gaius Wealthiest Maximus, a successful wine merchant who owns a domus in the fashionable Aventine district, your morning routine begins with the gentle awakening from your personal slave, Lucius. He approaches your bed carrying a silver basin filled with water that's been warmed over the kitchen fire and scented with imported rose petals from Syria. The water itself has been filtered through sand and charcoal, a luxury that costs more than most Romans earn in a month. But it's still not what we'd consider truly clean. Roman water filtration removed the bigger chunks of debris, but bacteria, parasites, and dissolved minerals remain to wreak havoc on anyone foolish enough to drink it straight. But if you're Quintus Desperatus Poricus, a construction worker living in a cramped apartment above a fish sauce factory, your morning water routine is considerably more adventurous. You stumble down 3 flights of precarious stairs to the communal well in the building's courtyard, where you'll draw water that's been sitting stagnant for who knows how long. The well itself is supposed to be cleaned monthly, but the last time anyone actually did it, Trajan was still emperor. The water has a greenish tint and a smell that suggests several generations of pigeons have been using it as their personal toilet, but it's free, and in Rome, free water is often the only water available to the poor. Regardless of your social status, the first priority is always your mouth. Roman breath was legendary throughout the ancient world, and not in a good way. Without toothpaste, mouthwash, or any real understanding of dental hygiene, Romans developed creative solutions that ranged from merely ineffective to actively harmful. The wealthy might start their day by chewing on aromatic herbs like mint or parsley, which provided temporary relief but did nothing to address the underlying problems of tooth decay and gum disease that plagued virtually every Roman over the age of 20. For actual tooth cleaning, Romans used a variety of powders and pastes that would make modern dentists weep. The upper classes favored a mixture of crushed pearls and honey, applied with a small bronze spatula and scrubbed with rough linen cloths. This had the advantage of being expensive enough to demonstrate wealth, but the disadvantage of being about as effective as brushing your teeth with sand, which coincidentally was exactly what the middle classes did. They used actual sand mixed with salt and herbs, creating an abrasive paste that gradually wore their teeth down to stumps. The poor, lacking access to expensive pearls or even clean sand, relied on whatever was readily available. Crushed animal bones were popular, as was charcoal mixed with wine. Some enterprising Romans discovered that certain types of clay had mild abrasive properties and could be mixed with urine to create a paste that actually did remove some plaque. The fact that this paste tasted exactly as horrible as you'd expect didn't deter its use. After all, if it tasted good, it probably wasn't working. But the truly desperate turned to what Roman physicians swore was the most effective dental treatment available: human urine, preferably fresh, and from a young, healthy person. Portuguese urine was considered especially potent, leading to a bizarre international trade in bottled piss that made certain merchants extraordinarily wealthy. The theory was that the ammonia in urine would whiten teeth and kill harmful bacteria, and the theory was actually partially correct. The ammonia did have some cleaning properties, but it also destroyed tooth enamel and left people with breath that could clear a crowded forum in seconds. After addressing the mouth situation, attention turned to the hair, which presented its own unique set of challenges. Roman hairstyles were not merely fashion choices, they were social statements that required daily maintenance and a thorough understanding of complex cultural codes. Get your hair wrong, and you might as well wear a sign announcing your social status, your political affiliations, and your general competence as a human being. For wealthy Roman women like Claudia Laborata, wife of a prominent senator, hair care was a morning ritual that could easily consume 3 hours and require the assistance of multiple specialized slaves. Her hairstyle, and towering confection of braids, curls, and false pieces that added nearly a foot to her height, had to be completely reconstructed each morning. The process began with carefully removing the wooden pins and bronze clips that held everything in place, then gently combing out the previous day's arrangement without disturbing the expensive hair pieces made from the blonde locks of captured Germanic tribeswomen. The base layer of her own hair was then coated with a mixture of bear grease and imported olive oil, which served as both a styling product and a treatment for the lice that inevitably took up residence in any Roman hairdo. Over this went a light dusting of powdered orris root, which was supposed to absorb excess oil and provide a pleasant scent, though in practice it mostly turned into a grey paste that attracted insects. But the real challenge came in rebuilding the architectural marvel that was a Roman noblewoman's hairstyle. Each braid had to be perfectly positioned, each curl precisely shaped, and each false piece seamlessly integrated with the natural hair. The entire construction was held together with a complex system of pins, clips, ribbons, what can only be described as ancient hairspray, a mixture of tree resin and wine that dried to a hard shell capable of maintaining the style's integrity through moderate earthquakes. For Roman men, hair care was theoretically simpler but practically just as fraught with social implications. A man's hairstyle immediately announced his age, his politics, his military service, and his personal vanity. Young men wore their hair longer and more elaborately styled, often with carefully arranged curls that required daily attention with heated metal rods. Older men, especially those in political positions, favored shorter, more conservative cuts that suggested gravitas and wisdom. But balding presented a crisis that could destroy a man's social standing overnight. Roman culture associated a full head of hair with virility, intelligence, and divine favor, while baldness was seen as a sign of moral weakness and physical decay. This led to a thriving industry in hair restoration treatments that ranged from merely useless to actively dangerous. Popular remedies included rubbing the scalp with a mixture of ground horse teeth and bear bile, applying poultices made from crushed beetles and wine, or the nuclear option, a paste made from mouse brains, bat blood, and fermented fish heads. These treatments were expensive, time-consuming, and had roughly the same success rate as prayer, but desperate men continued to try them because the alternative, accepting baldness, was social suicide. The morning hair ritual concluded with the application of perfumed oils designed to provide a pleasant scent and discourage parasites. These oils were often imported from distant provinces at enormous expense, creating a thriving trade in aromatic products that formed the foundation of many Roman fortunes. Cinnamon oil from India, frankincense from Arabia, and cedar oil from Lebanon were mixed in complex formulations that supposedly enhanced both attractiveness and health. With your hair somewhat under control and your breath temporarily rendered less lethal, it's time to address what Romans considered the true mark of civilization: the complete and systematic removal of body hair. If there was one thing that separated Romans from the barbarian tribes they conquered, it was their obsessive dedication to achieving a hairless body that would make a modern swimmer jealous. This wasn't merely a fashion statement, it was a moral imperative, a daily declaration of your commitment to Roman values and your rejection of the animal nature that lurked beneath every civilized person's skin. For Marcus Smoothes Perfectus, a wealthy equestrian who owns several olive groves outside Rome, this morning ritual begins in his private grooming chamber, a room specifically designed for the elaborate process of hair removal. The walls are lined with polished bronze mirrors imported from Gaul, and shelves hold an impressive array of specialized tools that look more like surgical instruments than grooming aids. His personal slave, Depilatius, approaches with the first weapon in this daily war against unwanted hair, a set of bronze tweezers so sharp they could remove individual eyebrow hairs with surgical precision. The process begins with the face, where every hair that isn't part of the carefully maintained beard must be eliminated. Roman men spent enormous amounts of time and money achieving the perfect balance between masculine facial hair and civilized grooming. Too much hair and you looked like a barbarian, too little and you appeared effeminate. The ideal Roman beard was precisely trimmed, perfectly symmetrical, and required daily maintenance that would challenge a modern topiary artist. But facial hair was just the beginning. Roman standards of cleanliness demanded the removal of hair from virtually every other part of the body, a process that was both time-consuming and extraordinarily painful. The wealthy could afford skilled slaves who specialized in hair removal, but even their expertise couldn't eliminate the agony of having every unwanted hair individually plucked from sensitive areas. For areas where tweezing wasn't practical, Romans developed a variety of depilatory creams that ranged from mildly effective to genuinely dangerous. The most popular formula combined quicklime, arsenic and snake oil into a paste that was applied to the skin and left to burn away the hair along with the top several layers of skin. The process was excruciating and often left permanent scars, but Romans endured it because smooth skin was worth any amount of suffering. The middle classes, unable to afford professional hair removal services, made do with cruder methods that were often more dangerous than the expensive alternatives. Public bathhouses offered group hair removal sessions where customers would coat themselves with a mixture of pine resin and hot wax, then attempt to remove it with bronze scrapers. The screams echoing from these sessions were legendary throughout Rome, leading to the popular expression "suffering like a citizen at the baths." Women faced even more demanding hair removal standards than men. A proper Roman matron like Livia Hairless Maxima was expected to be completely hairless from the eyebrows down, a standard that required daily attention and a pain tolerance that would impress modern torture victims. The process began before dawn and often continued well into the morning, requiring the assistance of multiple slaves and an arsenal of specialized tools. The most popular method for female hair removal involved a technique called sugaring, where a sticky paste made from honey, lemon juice and various herbs was applied to the skin and then ripped off, taking the hair with it. This was marginally less painful than the male alternatives, but still required a level of stoicism that Romans considered essential to proper feminine character. But hair removal was only the beginning of Roman grooming standards. Once you'd achieved the desired level of hairlessness, it was time to address your skin, which needed to be not just clean but actively glowing with health and youth. This required a complex regimen of treatments that combined practical skin care with magical thinking and a generous helping of toxic substances. The foundation of Roman skin care was the application of various oils and creams designed to moisturize, protect, and enhance the natural beauty of the skin. The wealthy could afford exotic formulations containing ingredients sourced from across the empire: crocodile fat from Egypt, whale oil from the North Sea, and various plant extracts that had been aged in underground caves for years to achieve the proper potency. For achieving the pale complexion that was the height of Roman fashion, both men and women applied makeup containing white lead, a substance that provided the desired ghostly pallor while slowly poisoning the wearer. The lead-based cosmetics were mixed with various other ingredients to create different effects: crushed pearls for luminosity, ground coral for a subtle pink tint, and powdered antimony for dramatic eye makeup that could be seen from across a crowded amphitheater. The application of this makeup was an art form that required years of training and a steady hand. Too little, and you looked washed out and unhealthy. Too much, and you resembled a painted statue rather than a living person. The ideal Roman complexion was uniformly pale with subtle hints of color in exactly the right places, achieved through the careful layering of various toxic substances that gradually accumulated in the body and caused a slow decline into madness and death. For those who couldn't afford professional makeup application, Roman markets offered pre-mixed cosmetics that promised miraculous results at affordable prices. These bargain beauty products were often even more dangerous than their expensive counterparts, containing higher concentrations of lead and mercury along with creative additives like ground glass for exfoliation and various animal excretions for their supposed medicinal properties. The pursuit of perfect skin also involved regular treatments with face masks made from ingredients that would horrify modern dermatologists. Popular recipes included masks made from fresh blood, preferably from young animals, crushed snails mixed with wine, and various combinations of human and animal waste that were aged until they reached the proper consistency and aroma. Roman men were just as obsessed with skin care as women, though they were expected to be more subtle about it. A successful merchant like Gaius' glowing complexion would spend considerable time each morning applying skin treatments, but would vehemently deny using any feminine beauty products. Instead, he would claim to be using medicinal preparations or athletic conditioning treatments that just happened to make his skin soft, smooth, and unnaturally pale. The social pressure to maintain perfect skin was enormous, and Romans went to extraordinary lengths to hide any imperfections. Acne was treated with applications of sulfur and tar, which often made the condition worse but provided the satisfaction of doing something active about the problem. Scars were covered with thick layers of makeup, and age spots were attacked with bleaching agents so caustic they often left permanent damage. But perhaps the most demanding aspect of Roman grooming was the maintenance of perfect teeth and breath. Without modern dental care, Romans faced a constant battle against tooth decay, gum disease, and the legendary bad breath that marked them as distinctly Roman. The wealthy could afford to have their teeth cleaned and polished by skilled slaves using abrasive powders and metal tools. But even the best Roman dental care was primitive and often counterproductive. Now comes the moment that defines Roman hygiene more than any other. The elaborate, time-consuming and frankly bizarre ritual of getting your body clean using methods that would make a modern person question the very concept of cleanliness. This is where Roman engineering genius collides headfirst with Roman stubborn refusal to invent soap, creating a daily routine that's part spa treatment, part medieval torture, and part performance art. If you're Lucius Oily McScraperson, a prosperous fabric merchant who can afford the full Roman cleansing experience, your morning begins with the arrival of your personal bath slave, Scrapinius, carrying an amphora of the finest olive oil money can buy. This isn't the delicate, virgin pressed oil you drizzle on your salad. This is thick, often slightly rancid oil that's been sitting in clay jars for months, developing a consistency somewhere between honey and axle grease, and an aroma that suggests it may have been used to preserve fish at some point in its career. The oil application process is nothing if not thorough. Scrapinius begins at your head and works methodically downward, coating every inch of your body with a generous layer of oil. This isn't a light moisturizing treatment. We're talking about enough oil to deep fry a chicken, applied with the dedication of someone painting a house. The oil is rubbed into your scalp, worked between your fingers, slathered across your back, and applied to areas that really didn't need to be any more slippery than they already were. The theory behind this oil bath was actually sound. The oil would dissolve and capture dirt, sweat, dead skin, and whatever microscopic wildlife had taken up residence on your body overnight. The oil acted as a solvent, breaking down the grime and preparing it for removal. The problem was that the removal process involved scraping your skin with what amounted to a miniature garden hoe, and Romans had developed this technique long before anyone thought to ask whether there might be a gentler alternative. But if you're Quintus Porcius Scrapalot, a brickmaker who lives in a one-room apartment above a garum factory, your cleansing ritual is considerably more challenging. You can't afford imported olive oil, so you make do with whatever cooking oil you can buy or borrow, often mixed with animal fat to stretch it further. This improvised cleansing oil has a tendency to go rancid quickly in Rome's warm climate, creating an aroma that's somehow worse than whatever you're trying to clean off. The oil application takes place in your apartment's tiny courtyard, where you strip naked and attempt to coat yourself with oil while balancing on one foot to avoid the puddles of questionable liquid that seem to appear overnight in urban Rome. Without a slave to assist you, This becomes an exercise in contortion worthy of a circus performer, as you attempt to reach every part of your body while maintaining some semblance of dignity in front of your neighbors, who are engaged in identical struggles just a few feet away. Once you're thoroughly coated in oil, and we mean thoroughly, because any missed spots will become glaringly obvious during the next phase, it's time for the main event, the strigil. This curved bronze tool, roughly the size of a soup ladle but with a sharp edge, is the cornerstone of Roman hygiene technology. In the hands of a skilled bath attendant, a strigil could remove dirt and dead skin with surgical precision. In the hands of an amateur, it could remove considerably more than that. The scraping process follows a specific technique that took years to master. Too much pressure and you'd end up looking like you'd been attacked by a very small but determined tiger. Too little pressure and you'd finish your bath still coated in a mixture of oil and grime that would attract flies from 3 districts away. The ideal strigil technique involved long, smooth strokes that followed the contours of the body, applied with just enough pressure to remove the oil and its captured debris without penetrating too deeply into the skin. For the wealthy, this scraping was performed by trained slaves who had apprenticed under master bath attendants and understood the subtle art of removing exactly the right amount of skin. These experts could scrape a body clean in under an hour, leaving the skin pink smooth and only minimally bleeding. They knew how to angle the strigil to follow muscle contours, how much pressure to apply to different areas, and how to handle sensitive regions without causing permanent damage. The experience of being scraped clean was unlike anything in the modern world. Imagine lying on a marble slab while someone methodically removes the top layer of your epidermis with a metal tool, and you'll have some sense of what Romans considered the height of cleanliness. The sensation was simultaneously relaxing and alarming. The rhythmic scraping was almost meditative, but the knowledge that you were literally being flayed alive kept most people from getting too comfortable. The oil and debris removed by the strigil wasn't simply discarded. In one of ancient Rome's more revolting recycling programs, this mixture of oil, dirt, sweat, and dead skin was collected in small containers and sold as medicine. Wealthy Romans believed that the scraped-off essence of athletic gladiators had special healing properties, leading to a thriving market in what can only be described as weaponized body grime. The poor, lacking access to professional scrapers, had to make do with cruder tools and techniques. Some used broken pottery shards, others fashioned scrapers from scavenged metal, and the truly desperate simply rubbed themselves with rough stones until the oil and grime were gone along with several layers of skin. These improvised scraping sessions often resulted in infections, scars, and wounds that took weeks to heal, but Romans endured them because the alternative, mulking around coated in rancid oil, was socially unacceptable. Women faced additional challenges during the scraping process. The elaborate hairstyles that were essential to Roman feminine fashion made it nearly impossible to oil and scrape the scalp properly, leading to chronic problems with lice, dandruff, and scalp infections. Many women simply avoided washing their hair for weeks at a time, relying on perfumed powders and aromatic oils to mask the inevitable odors. The scraping process wasn't just about removing dirt, it was also a form of exfoliation that Romans believed was essential to health and beauty. The removal of dead skin was thought to improve circulation, enhance the absorption of medicinal oils, and provide a youthful glow that no amount of makeup could replicate. Modern dermatologists would be horrified by the aggressive daily exfoliation that Romans practiced, but contemporary Romans swore by its effectiveness. After the initial scraping, the process was often repeated with fresh oil to ensure complete cleanliness. This secondary oiling and scraping removed any remaining debris and provided an opportunity to treat specific skin problems with medicated oils. Wealthy Romans might go through this cycle 3 or 4 times during a single bathing session, emerging pink, smooth and smelling like an olive grove. The final stage of the oil and scrape process involved the application of perfumed oils designed to moisturize the freshly scraped skin and provide a pleasant aroma. These finishing oils were often the most expensive part of the entire ritual, containing rare ingredients imported from distant provinces and mixed according to secret formulas that were passed down through generations of perfumers. With your skin now resembling a freshly plucked chicken and smelling like an expensive delicatessen, it's time to face one of the most challenging aspects of Roman daily life: getting dressed in a civilization that had mastered architecture, law, and military conquest, but somehow never quite figured out the concept of underwear. This isn't simply a matter of throwing on some clothes and grabbing breakfast. This is a complex engineering challenge that requires careful planning, architectural knowledge, and the physical flexibility of a professional contortionist. If you're Gaius Ruperius Complexly, a successful wine merchant who owns a villa overlooking the Bay of Naples, your morning dressing ritual begins with your personal valet, Clothesius, approaching with what appears to be enough fabric to outfit a small army. The centerpiece of your wardrobe is the toga, that magnificent symbol of Roman citizenship that doubles as a practical joke played by the gods on anyone foolish enough to wear one. The toga isn't so much a garment as it is a geometric puzzle, involving 18 feet of woolen fabric that must be draped, folded, and arranged in precise patterns that would challenge a professional origami artist. The process begins with the tunic, a simple linen garment that serves as the foundation for everything else. But even this apparently straightforward piece of clothing presents challenges in a world without elastic, buttons, or zippers. The tunic is essentially a large rectangular piece of fabric with holes cut for your head and arms, held in place by a belt and the fervent hope that you won't need to move too quickly during the day. The fabric itself, while comfortable, has usually been washed in the same urine-based cleaning solution used for everything else in Rome, giving it a distinctive aroma that experienced Romans learned to ignore. Over the tunic goes the subliga, which is as close as Romans got to underwear. This is essentially a loincloth that provides minimal coverage and maximum opportunity for embarrassing wardrobe malfunctions. The subliga serves more as a symbolic gesture toward modesty than as actual protection, since it's made from the same rough linen as everything else, and has a tendency to shift, bunch, and generally fail at the worst possible moments. But the real challenge comes with the toga itself, a garment that represents everything both magnificent and absurd about Roman civilization. The toga is a semicircular piece of wool that measures roughly 18 feet in length and requires the assistance of at least 2 people to put on properly. The fabric must be draped over the left shoulder, wrapped around the body in a specific pattern, and arranged so that one end hangs at precisely the right length, while the other end is folded over the left arm in a carefully calculated display of casual elegance. For wealthy Romans like our wine merchant, the toga is made from the finest wool available, often imported from sheep that have been fed special diets and massaged daily to produce fleece of exceptional quality. The fabric is then woven by master craftsmen and dyed using expensive pigments that indicate the wearer's social status. A senator's toga includes a purple stripe that costs more than most Romans earn in a year, while ordinary citizens make do with plain white fabric that shows every stain and requires constant cleaning. The actual process of putting on a toga is a choreographed dance between the wearer and his assistants. Clothesius begins by draping the fabric over your left shoulder, then carefully wraps it around your back and under your right arm. The fabric must be arranged so that it creates the proper folds and drapes, with each section falling at exactly the right length and angle. Too loose and you look like you're wearing a bedsheet, too tight and you can't move without the entire arrangement collapsing. But if you're Quintus Simplicius Poricus, a fishmonger who lives in a cramped apartment near the docks, your morning dressing routine is considerably simpler and considerably more challenging. You own exactly one tunic, which you've been wearing for the past week because you can't afford to have it cleaned at the local fullery. The tunic has developed its own ecosystem of stains, odors and small tears that you've attempted to repair using whatever thread you could scavenge. Your subligar is a piece of cloth that started life as part of a grain sack and has been repurposed through necessity rather than choice. It's held together with knots and hope, and you've learned to move very carefully to avoid sudden wardrobe failures that would leave you naked in front of your neighbors. You don't own a toga because you can't afford one, and even if you could, you wouldn't have anywhere to wear it or anyone to help you put it on. Instead, you wear a second tunic over the first when the weather is cold, creating a layered look that's more practical than fashionable. Both tunics are made from the cheapest linen available, which means they're rough, scratchy, and have the consistency of burlap. The fabric has been dyed using the least expensive methods available, usually involving clay, tree bark, and other materials that fade quickly and leave the clothing a muddy brown color that hides stains, but also makes you look like you've been rolling in dirt. Getting dressed as a poor Roman also means dealing with the reality that your clothes are infested with the same parasites that plague your living space. Fleas, lice, and other insects have taken up permanent residence in the fabric, creating a mobile ecosystem that travels with you throughout the day. You've developed the ability to scratch discreetly while maintaining conversations, a skill that all Romans master by necessity. Footwear presents its own challenges across all social classes. The wealthy wear sandals made from fine leather and decorated with intricate metalwork, but even these provide minimal protection from the streets of Rome. The poor make do with wooden clogs or simply go barefoot, developing calluses thick enough to walk on broken pottery and still feel comfortable. Roman streets are filled with animal waste, garbage, and various liquids that you really don't want to identify, making every step a potential hygiene disaster. With the complicated process of getting dressed finally complete, it's time to address the question of breakfast, which in Rome is less a meal than a strategic preparation for surviving until the main meal of the day. Roman breakfast reflects the same class divisions that govern everything else in the empire, with the wealthy enjoying elaborate morning repasts while the poor make do with whatever they can afford or scavenge. For our successful wine merchant, breakfast is served by household slaves in a pleasant garden courtyard where the morning light filters through carefully maintained grapevines. The meal includes fresh bread baked in the villa's private ovens, honey imported from Greece, cheese made from the milk of goats fed on mountain herbs, and fresh fruit picked from the estate's orchards. Wine is mixed with water in the proper proportions. Drinking undiluted wine in the morning would be considered evidence of serious character flaws. But for the fishmonger, breakfast consists of whatever bread he can afford from the public grain distribution, often supplemented with garlic, onions, or whatever vegetables he can buy cheaply at the market. The bread itself is frequently stale and sometimes moldy, but it's free and provides the calories needed to survive another day of manual labor. He drinks water from the public fountains, which is theoretically clean but often carries a taste that suggests it's been filtered through several miles of lead pipes. The contrast between rich and poor is nowhere more evident than in their morning eating habits, but both groups share the same fundamental challenge: surviving in a world where food safety is a matter of luck rather than science. Now comes the true spectacle of Roman hygiene, the visit to the public baths where getting clean becomes a social event, a political opportunity, a business meeting, and occasionally a health hazard, all rolled into one magnificent, steamy, potentially deadly experience. This isn't just about washing once, this is about participating in one of Rome's most important social institutions, where your status is measured not by how clean you get, but by how impressively you display your wealth while getting clean. If you're Lucius Socius Maximus, a successful olive oil trader who owns warehouses throughout the Mediterranean, your approach to the public baths is a carefully orchestrated performance designed to demonstrate your prosperity while maintaining the illusion that you're just another Roman citizen enjoying the democratic pleasure of communal bathing. You arrive at the baths of Agrippa in a litter carried by 4 matching Nubian slaves, followed by a small entourage that includes your personal bath attendant, a slave to carry your oils and strigils, another to handle your clothes, and a bodyguard to ensure that nobody steals your expensive bathing accessories. The entrance to the baths is itself a statement of Roman engineering prowess and social ambition. The building towers over the surrounding streets like a marble mountain, its facade decorated with statues of gods, emperors and various mythological figures, engaged in activities that would make a modern health inspector reach for his citation book. The entrance fee varies depending on your social status. Senators and equestrians pay premium prices for access to private facilities, while ordinary citizens pay modest fees for access to the general population areas. But if you're Quintus Porcius Desperatus, that same fishmonger we met earlier, your experience at the public baths is considerably different. You arrive on foot, carrying your own small jar of cheap oil and a battered strigil that's seen better decades. You pay the minimal entrance fee that allows access to the most crowded and least pleasant sections of the complex, where you'll share facilities with hundreds of other Romans who are engaged in the same basic struggle to achieve some semblance of cleanliness. The public baths of Rome are marvels of engineering that demonstrate both the heights of Roman civilization and its fundamental contradictions. These massive complexes can accommodate thousands of bathers simultaneously, featuring hot and cold pools, steam rooms, exercise areas, libraries and restaurants all under one roof. The water is heated by an ingenious system called a hypoxed, where furnaces heat air that circulates through hollow spaces in the floors and walls, maintaining perfect temperatures throughout the facility. But here's where Roman logic takes a peculiar turn. While they've mastered the engineering challenges of moving and heating enormous quantities of water, they've somehow overlooked the importance of actually changing that water on a regular basis. The same water that's used by hundreds or thousands of people each day circulates through the system for weeks or even months before being replaced. By the time you settle into what's supposed to be a refreshing bath, you're essentially marinating in a soup that contains the accumulated oils, dead skin, bodily fluids, and various microscopic organisms contributed by every previous bather. The wealthy attempt to avoid this problem by timing their visits for early morning when the water is theoretically cleanest, or by paying extra for access to smaller private pools that are shared by fewer people. But even the most exclusive facilities operate on the same basic principle: circulate the water, heat it thoroughly, and hope that the high temperatures kill whatever dangerous organisms might be lurking in the depths. The social dynamics of the public baths are as complex as Roman politics, and just as treacherous. Your choice of bathing time, the oils you use, the slaves who accompany you, and even the way you conduct yourself in the water, all send signals about your social status, political affiliations, and personal character. Wealthy Romans like our olive oil trader use the baths as an extension of their business operations, conducting negotiations while soaking in hot water and discussing trade routes while being scraped clean by skilled attendants. The bathing sequence itself follows a prescribed ritual that's both practical and social. You begin in the tepidarium, a warm room designed to prepare your body for the extreme heat to come. Here the atmosphere is relatively relaxed, with bathers engaging in conversation, while their pores open and their bodies adjust to the temperature. The wealthy recline on marble benches while slaves apply the first round of oils. The poor huddle together on wooden seats and oil themselves as best they can. Next comes the coldarium, the hottest room in the complex, where the temperature approaches that of a modern sauna, and the air is thick with steam and the accumulated exhalations of hundreds of sweating bodies. This is where the serious business of getting clean takes place, as the extreme heat opens your pores and prepares your skin for the oil and scraping process. The wealthy have their own private areas within the coldarium, separated from the masses by expensive screens and attended by teams of specialized slaves. But for the ordinary citizens, the coldarium is a crowded, chaotic environment where personal space is a luxury that doesn't exist. You're pressed shoulder to shoulder with fellow Romans from every walk of life, might soldiers, merchants, craftsmen, freed slaves, and the occasional senator who's trying to appear more democratic than he actually is. The air is filled with the sounds of conversation, argument, business deals, and the occasional fight that breaks out when someone disputes another bather's right to a particular spot. The scraping process in this crowded environment becomes a delicate dance of cooperation and competition. Those with personal attendants can have their scraping done efficiently and thoroughly. Those without must either attempt to scrape themselves, a nearly impossible task, or rely on the assistance of fellow bathers who may or may not know what they're doing. The result is often an incomplete cleaning, punctuated by accidental injuries when inexperienced hands wield the bronze strigils with more enthusiasm than skill. The final stage of the bathing ritual takes place in the frigidarium, where cold pools provide a shocking contrast to the heat of the coldarium. The theory is that this sudden temperature change strengthens the constitution and improves health, but the reality is often a gasping, heart-stopping plunge into water that's been sitting stagnant for weeks and probably contains organisms that won't be discovered by science for another 1,000 years. Throughout this entire process, the baths serve as Rome's unofficial information network, where news, gossip, and rumors spread faster than the various diseases that also circulate through the facility. Political alliances are formed and broken, business deals are negotiated, marriages are arranged, and social hierarchies are reinforced through the complex etiquette of communal bathing. As the afternoon sun reaches its peak and the heat becomes unbearable even by Roman standards, thoughts naturally turn to the evening's entertainment, specifically to the elaborate dining rituals that transform the simple act of eating into a complex display of wealth, power, and social positioning. Roman dining isn't just about consuming food. It's about demonstrating your ability to command resources from across the known world and present them in ways that would make modern celebrity chefs weep with envy or horror, depending on their tolerance for dishes that combine exotic ingredients with questionable food safety practices. If you're Marcus Gluttonius Excessivus, a senator who owns silver mines in Spain and wheat fields in Egypt, your evening banquet represents the culmination of months of planning and an expenditure that could fund a small military campaign. Your head chef, a Greek slave named Culinarius who cost more than most Romans' houses, has been preparing since dawn to create a menu that will establish your reputation as a host worthy of the gods themselves, or at least worthy of other senators who are equally committed to competitive overspending. The dining room, or triclinium, has been transformed into a stage set designed to overwhelm the senses and empty your treasury. The floor is covered with rose petals imported from Damascus at enormous expense, creating a carpet that releases clouds of perfume with every footstep. The walls are draped with silk tapestries from China, depicting scenes of mythological feasts where gods and mortals recline together in eternal celebration. Golden oil lamps, each worth more than a skilled craftsman's annual salary, provide flickering light that casts dancing shadows across the elaborate frescoes covering the ceiling. The dining couches themselves are works of art, carved from ivory and inlaid with precious metals, cushioned with silk pillows stuffed with swan down, and covered in fabrics dyed with Tyrian purple. The color so expensive that wearing it without imperial permission was considered treason. Each couch is positioned to provide the perfect view of the evening's entertainment, while allowing easy access to the low tables where the feast will be displayed like offerings in a temple. But the real spectacle begins when the food arrives, carried by a parade of slaves dressed in costumes representing the various provinces from which the ingredients have been sourced. The appetizers alone represent a tour of the Roman Empire: oysters from Britain, still alive and spraying seawater; pickled eggs from ostriches, hunted in the deserts of North Africa; cheese made from the milk of deer that graze in the forests of Germania; and honey collected from beehives tended by slaves on remote Greek islands. The first course proper features dishes that defy both logic and digestive capability. There's a whole roasted peacock that's been carefully skinned, cooked and then redressed in its own feathers to create the illusion that a live bird has simply decided to recline on a golden platter. The preparation of this single dish required the labor of 12 slaves working for 3 days, not counting the additional slave whose sole responsibility was to pluck and preserve the feathers in perfect condition. Next comes a dish that exemplifies Roman culinary ambition: a whole roasted wild boar stuffed with live thrushes, which in turn have been stuffed with dormice, which have been stuffed with nuts and honey. The theoretical idea is that when the boar is carved, the thrushes will fly out, creating a spectacular presentation. The practical reality is that most of the birds have suffocated during the cooking process, leading to a display that's more necromantic than aesthetic. But the true masterpiece of Roman excess is the dish that Culinarius calls the Treasury of Neptune, a massive platter designed to showcase the empire's control over distant seas. At its center sits a giant sea bass that was caught in the Atlantic and kept alive during a week-long journey to Rome in a specially constructed tank. The fish is surrounded by smaller seafood arranged to represent various mythological scenes: lobsters posed as gladiators battling with their claws, sea urchins arranged to form the constellation Pisces, and octopi arranged in what's supposed to be an erotic tableau, but mostly resembles a marine disaster. The preparation of each dish involves ingredients that have traveled thousands of miles and cost fortunes to acquire. The sauce for the sea bass contains garum. This is premium garum made from the blood and entrails of tuna caught off the coast of Spain, aged for 2 years in underground caves, and flavored with spices from India that cost their weight in silver. For those who prefer land-based proteins, there's a selection of exotic meats that demonstrates the reach of Roman hunting expeditions. Roasted flamingo tongue, considered the height of delicacy, sits alongside grilled elephant heart, braised tiger kidneys, and what the chef claims is unicorn liver but is probably just an expensive cut of rhinoceros. Each meat has been prepared with sauces that combine local herbs with imported spices in combinations that would challenge even modern fusion cuisine. But if you're Quintus Modestus Poricus, yes, our fishmonger friend has managed to secure an invitation, probably through some political connection or social obligation. Your experience of this feast is considerably different. You've been assigned to the least prestigious couch, positioned where you can see the food but have difficulty reaching it. Your wine has been heavily watered, your portions are smaller, and you're acutely aware that every bite you take represents more wealth than you'll see in months of selling fish. The social dynamics of the banquet are as carefully orchestrated as the menu itself. Every gesture, every comment, every reaction to the food is observed and interpreted by the other guests. Appearing too impressed suggests you're not accustomed to such luxury. Appearing unimpressed suggests you're either incredibly wealthy yourself or dangerously arrogant. The safe strategy is to display measured appreciation while making subtle observations about the quality of specific ingredients or the skill of the preparation. The entertainment between courses adds another layer of complexity to the evening. Professional musicians play instruments imported from Egypt and Syria, their melodies providing a sophisticated backdrop to the conversation. Dancers from various provinces perform traditional routines, their exotic movements and costumes adding visual stimulation to the sensory overload of the feast. But the most elaborate entertainment involves what Romans call surprise dishes, foods that appear to be one thing but transform into something else when carved or opened. A roasted swan that bleeds wine when cut, thanks to bladders of vintage hidden within its cavity. A cake shaped like a temple that collapses to reveal live birds when touched. A whole roasted pig that's been hollowed out and filled with sausages, so that when carved it appears to give birth to its own offspring. These culinary theatrics require enormous planning and expense, but they serve an important social function. They demonstrate the host's ability to command not just wealth but creativity, to present familiar concepts in unexpected ways. In a society where social status is constantly being negotiated and re-established, the ability to surprise and delight your guests becomes a form of political power. The wine selection alone represents a tour of the empire's finest vineyards. There's Falernian wine from the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, aged for decades until it achieves a potency that can knock an elephant unconscious. Sweet wine from Cyprus, mixed with honey and spices to create a drink that's more medicine than beverage. And for the truly adventurous, experimental wines flavored with everything from rose petals to ground pearls, creating beverages that challenge both the palate and the digestive system. As the evening progresses and the wine begins to work its ancient magic on the assembled guests, the banquet transforms from a mere display of wealth into something far more dangerous. A political arena where every gesture carries weight, every toast conceals a threat, and every shared joke might determine the fate of provinces. This is where Roman social hygiene becomes truly treacherous, because in addition to managing your physical appearance and bodily functions, you must now navigate the infinitely more complex challenge of maintaining your political cleanliness in a room full of people who would happily destroy you for sport. If you're a wealthy Senator Marcus Gluttonius Excessivus, you're not just hosting a dinner party, you're conducting a symphony of alliances, rivalries, and carefully calculated insults. Every aspect of the evening, from the seating arrangements to the order in which dishes are served, sends messages that will be analyzed and discussed throughout Rome for weeks to come. The guest reclining on the couch to your right is Lucius Ambitiosus Scumus, a fellow senator who controls several legions on the Germanic frontier and has been making subtle inquiries about your loyalty to the current emperor. The fact that you've seated him in the position of honor suggests either deep respect or profound fear, and everyone in the room is trying to determine which. The conversation that flows around the low tables is as carefully seasoned as the food itself. Politics is discussed, but only obliquely through references to historical events and mythological parallels that allow speakers to express dangerous opinions without technically committing treason. When Lucius mentions that even Odysseus knew when it was time to change course, everyone understands he's suggesting that the current emperor's policies are leading the empire toward disaster, but he's done so in a way that makes prosecution for sedition nearly impossible. Your own contributions to this verbal dance require the diplomatic skills of a professional ambassador combined with the timing of a stage comedian. Too much agreement with controversial statements marks you as a potential conspirator. Too little suggests you're either hopelessly naive or dangerously loyal to the wrong people. The ideal response involves subtle redirection, perhaps a witty observation about the quality of the wine that changes the subject while demonstrating your sophisticated taste and cultural knowledge. But navigating the political currents of Roman dinner conversation is only part of the challenge. You must also manage the physical realities of eating while reclining on a couch, a position that Romans consider the height of civilized dining, but which presents numerous opportunities for embarrassing accidents. The act of reaching for food while maintaining an elegant pose requires years of practice, and even experienced diners occasionally knock over wine cups or drop pieces of roasted peacock onto their expensive togas. The hygiene challenges of Roman dining extend far beyond simple table manners. Eating with your fingers, the only acceptable method, since forks haven't been invented yet, means that your hands are constantly covered with oil, sauce, and various food residues. Slaves circulate with basins of scented water and soft cloths for cleaning, but the process of washing your hands becomes itself a social ritual that must be performed with appropriate grace and timing. Meanwhile, if you're Quintus Modestus Poricus, our fishmonger friend who somehow managed to secure an invitation to this gathering of the Roman elite, your evening is an exercise in social terror that makes gladiatorial combat seem relaxing by comparison. Every moment brings new opportunities for catastrophic failure, reaching for the wrong dish, drinking from the wrong cup, or worst of all, making a comment that reveals your humble origins and lack of classical education. Your strategy for survival involves careful observation and minimal participation. You watch the other guests to learn the proper procedures for everything, from how to signal for more wine to how to dispose of olive pits without causing offense. When the conversation turns to poetry or philosophy, you nod sagely while desperately trying to remember fragments of education you received years ago from a Greek slave who tutored the children of your former master. The physical challenges are even more daunting than the social ones. The reclining position that comes naturally to those raised in wealth feels awkward and unstable to someone accustomed to sitting upright on simple stools. Your toga, borrowed for the occasion, and not quite the right size, threatens to slip out of position every time you move. The rich food, far heavier and more elaborately spiced than anything in your normal diet, sits uncomfortably in your stomach and threatens to reappear at the worst possible moment. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of the evening is managing your bodily functions while maintaining social dignity. The wealthy guests have access to private facilities attended by personal slaves, but lower status attendees must use the communal chamber pots that are discreetly positioned around the dining area. The act of relieving yourself while surrounded by senators and their wives requires a level of social courage that borders on heroism. The entertainment that punctuates the meal adds another layer of complexity to the evening's social dynamics. When Syrian dancers perform between courses, the appropriate response involves appreciative but not overly enthusiastic applause. When poets recite verses celebrating the emperor's wisdom and virtue, guests must demonstrate the proper level of patriotic fervor without appearing sycophantic. When musicians play complex melodies on instruments imported from distant provinces, knowledgeable comments about the regional musical traditions demonstrate cultural sophistication. The drinking rituals that accompany Roman dining are particularly treacherous for the uninitiated. Wine is always mixed with water, in proportions that vary according to the time of evening, the social status of the drinkers, and the political significance of the occasion. Drinking unmixed wine is considered barbaric, But the proper ratio requires knowledge that comes only through years of experience in elite social circles. As the evening progresses and the effects of wine accumulate, the political undertones of conversation become more explicit and more dangerous. Senators who began the evening discussing poetry and philosophy are now making barely veiled references to military appointments, provincial governorships, and the succession plans of aging emperors. Alliances that have been brewing for months are solidified with seemingly casual invitations to future gatherings, while enemies mark each other for future destruction through subtle snubs and calculated insults. The host's responsibility during this phase of the evening involves maintaining the delicate balance between encouraging open discussion and preventing outright sedition. Too much control and you appear paranoid. Too little and your dinner party becomes a conspiracy meeting that could result in executions for all involved. The art lies in guiding conversation toward topics that allow guests to express their political positions without creating evidence that could be used against them later. For those skilled in the arts of Roman political dining, the evening's conversations provide valuable intelligence about the shifting loyalties and hidden agendas that drive imperial politics. Who sits with whom, who avoids whom, who drinks how much, and who leaves early all provide clues about alliances, rivalries, and plots that may determine the future of the empire. But for the unwary or inexperienced, a single misstep can result in social death or worse. A poorly timed comment about imperial policy, an inappropriate laugh at a political joke, or even excessive enthusiasm for a particular dish can mark someone as unreliable, dangerous, or simply not worthy of inclusion in future gatherings of the Roman elite. As the last guests finally depart into the torch-lit streets of Rome, their litters swaying drunkenly through the darkness while their bearers navigate puddles of questionable origin, you're left to confront the harsh reality that underlies all Roman social performance. Beneath the carefully constructed facade of civilized sophistication lies a collection of very human vulnerabilities that no amount of wealth, power, or expensive grooming products can eliminate. The evening's elaborate display of control and refinement has extracted its toll, and now comes the private reckoning with the physical and psychological costs of maintaining your position in Roman society. If you're Marcus Gluttonius Excessivus, the senator whose banquet has just concluded, your first priority is addressing the immediate aftermath of hosting an evening that cost more than most provincial towns see in a year. Your toga, that magnificent symbol of Roman citizenship, is now stained with wine, oil, and various sauces that have dripped from the elaborate dishes served throughout the evening. The purple stripe that marks your senatorial rank is particularly damaged. A splash of garum has left a dark stain that will require the services of the city's most expensive fabric cleaners, assuming it can be removed at all. The removal of the toga itself becomes a complex operation requiring the assistance of multiple slaves. The 18 feet of woolen fabric must be carefully unwrapped and folded to preserve its shape for future use, while avoiding further damage from the evening's accumulated stains. Your personal valet, vestimentus, examines each section of the garment with the intensity of a military engineer, surveying a battlefield, cataloguing the damage and planning the restoration campaign that will begin at dawn. Beneath the toga, your tunic is in an even worse state. The linen fabric, which began the day as a pristine white garment worthy of a senator, now resembles a painter's smock. Wine stains, food spills, and the inevitable perspiration from hours of political performance have combined to create a textile disaster that would challenge modern cleaning technology. The tunic will likely need to be discarded entirely, another casualty in the endless war between Roman social expectations and the practical realities of human existence. But the damage goes far deeper than mere clothing. Your body, which was carefully groomed and oiled to perfection this morning, now bears the accumulated evidence of a day spent maintaining your public image. Your skin, already irritated from the morning's aggressive strigil scraping, has been further insulted by hours of heavy makeup, perfumed oils, and the various cosmetics applied throughout the day to maintain your senatorial glow. The lead-based face powder that provided such an elegant pale complexion now feels like a mask of dried clay, cracking at the corners of your eyes and mouth every time you speak or smile. Your personal physician, Medicus Experimentalis, approaches with his evening collection of treatments designed to repair the damage inflicted by the day's beauty regimen. The first step involves carefully removing the makeup, using a mixture of olive oil and wine, a process that stings the abraded skin and leaves your face red and raw. The removal process reveals the true cost of Roman cosmetic practices. Dark circles under your eyes, partially concealed by this morning's makeup, are now more pronounced after hours of political stress and wine consumption. Small sores at the corners of your mouth, caused by the caustic ingredients in tooth-whitening preparations, have worsened throughout the day. Most alarming of all, a slight tremor in your hands, barely noticeable this morning, has become more pronounced, possibly an early sign of the lead poisoning that eventually claims so many Romans who can afford the finest cosmetics. Your teeth, subjected to multiple cleanings with abrasive powders throughout the day, feel loose in their sockets and ache with a persistent pain that no amount of wine can completely numb. The exotic tooth powders and mouth rinses, used to maintain your senatorial smile, have gradually worn away the enamel, leaving the underlying structures vulnerable to decay and infection. Your personal dentist, a Greek slave named Extraction Maximus, examines your mouth with poorly concealed concern and recommends a treatment involving fresh horse urine that you're desperate enough to consider. Meanwhile, your digestive system is staging its own rebellion against the evening's excesses. The exotic meats, elaborate sauces, and experimental wine combinations that demonstrated your sophisticated palate are now combining in your stomach to create a chemical reaction that would impress an alchemist. The cramping that began during the final course has intensified, and you're facing the prospect of a long night, punctuated by frequent visits to your private latrine. But if you're Quintus Modestus Poricus, our fishmonger who somehow survived an evening among the Roman elite, your post-banquet experience is both simpler and more terrifying. The borrowed toga that allowed you to attend the gathering must be returned immediately to avoid accusations of theft, leaving you to make the journey home through Rome's dangerous nighttime streets, wearing only your everyday tunic. The rich food that your stomach isn't accustomed to processing has left you nauseous and weak, while the unwatered wine you consumed in an attempt to fit in has left you dizzy and disoriented. Your feet, unused to the elaborate sandals required for senatorial company, are covered with blisters that make every step an agony. The perfumed oils applied for the occasion have mixed with your natural body odors to create an aroma that's neither fish nor flowers, but something uniquely unpleasant. Most dangerously of all, your behavior during the evening may have marked you as either a potential ally or enemy of various political factions, making you a target for violence or recruitment that your simple fishmonger's life has left you unprepared to handle. The journey home through Rome's nighttime streets presents its own hygiene challenges for all social classes. The city's magnificent public works, those aqueducts, sewers and paved roads that represent the triumph of Roman engineering, take on a more sinister character after dark. The same streets that bustle with commerce and culture during the day become rivers of waste and violence once the sun sets. The The public latrines that serve as convenient facilities during daylight hours become gathering places for criminals and outcasts who use them as shelter from the night air. The fountains that provide clean water for morning ablutions are contaminated by the day's accumulation of refuse and bodily fluids. Even the magnificent baths, those temples to Roman cleanliness, lock their doors at sunset, leaving the city's population to manage their hygiene needs as best they can until dawn. For the wealthy, the solution involves chamber pots, private facilities, and the constant attendance of slaves who can address any nighttime hygiene emergencies. But for the poor, the night brings a suspension of the civilization that Rome represents during daylight hours. Waste is disposed of wherever convenient, usually out of windows or into the nearest street. Personal cleaning becomes impossible, leading to an accumulation of grime and odor that will need to be addressed when the public facilities reopen at dawn. The psychological toll of maintaining Roman social standards adds another layer to the evening's aftermath. The constant performance required by Roman society, the careful management of appearance, behavior, and conversation, creates a stress that manifests in physical symptoms. Headaches from lid-based cosmetics combine with anxiety about political positioning to create a syndrome that Roman physicians treat with various combinations of wine, opium, and prayer. Sleep, when it finally comes, offers little respite from the day's accumulated damage. Roman beds, for all their luxury, provide little protection from the parasites that infest even the finest households. Bedbugs, fleas, and lice use the night hours to continue their assault on Roman flesh, ensuring that tomorrow's hygiene challenges will begin before consciousness returns. Dawn breaks over Rome with its usual symphony of roosters, vendors, and the gentle splash of chamber pots being emptied from upper-story windows. But today brings a different set of hygiene challenges. Instead of the elaborate dinner parties and political maneuvering that defined yesterday's social calendar, today is dedicated to one of Rome's most beloved and bloodthirsty entertainments, the gladiatorial games. This means an entirely different kind of performance, requiring specialized grooming techniques, crowd-appropriate clothing, and the physical stamina to maintain your social dignity while watching human beings dismember each other for sport. If you're Gaius Spectaculus Maximus, a wealthy grain merchant who has purchased premium seating for today's games at the Colosseum, your morning preparation begins before the first light touches the Seven Hills. Today's outfit must strike the perfect balance between demonstrating your prosperity and showing appropriate respect for the martial nature of the entertainment. You won't be wearing the formal toga that marked you as a sophisticated dinner guest. Today calls for more practical attire that can withstand hours in the sun while still announcing your social status to the 50,000 Romans who will pack the amphitheater. Your personal slave, Vestiarius, approaches with a selection of tunics that have been specially prepared for public events. These garments are made from linen that's been treated with a mixture of cedar oil and aromatic herbs designed to repel the insects that inevitably swarm around large gatherings of sweating humanity. The tunics themselves are dyed in colors that won't show blood spatters, a practical consideration when attending events where arterial spray is considered part of the entertainment. The grooming process for gladiatorial games requires its own specialized techniques. Your barber, Tonsorius, applies a lighter hand with the morning scraping, knowing that you'll be sweating heavily throughout the day and don't want your skin raw and irritated before the ordeal even begins. The oils applied to your skin are mixed with substances believed to provide protection from the evil eye, a precaution that sophisticated Romans would deny believing in, while secretly considering essential when surrounded by violent death. Your hair receives special attention, styled in a way that will remain presentable even after hours of sitting in the sun while surrounded by the unwashed masses. The pomade used to keep everything in place contains ingredients designed to discourage lice and fleas, though experience has taught you that no amount of expensive grooming products can completely protect against the parasites that flourish in crowds of this size. But if you're Quintus Plebeius Communis, a construction worker who has managed to scrape together the small silver coin required for admission to the cheapest seats, your preparation for the games involves different priorities and considerably more risk. You own only one decent tunic, which you've been saving for special occasions, and you can't afford to have it cleaned if it gets stained with blood, vomit, or the various other fluids that tend to flow freely during gladiatorial entertainment. Your morning wash consists of splashing cold water on your face and hands from the public fountain, using a scrap of rough cloth to remove the most obvious dirt from your skin. You can't afford oils or perfumes, so you rely on a handful of mint leaves to freshen your breath, and a piece of charcoal rubbed on your teeth in a futile attempt to achieve something resembling cleanliness. The journey to the Colosseum presents its own hygiene challenges for all social classes. The streets leading to the amphitheatre become rivers of humanity, with Romans from every level of society converging on the great arena. The wealthy travel in litters that protect them from direct contact with the crowd, but even they can't escape the rising cloud of collective body odor that accompanies 50,000 people who consider weekly bathing a luxury rather than a necessity. For those traveling on foot, the experience becomes a test of endurance that begins long before the actual games. You're pressed shoulder to shoulder with fellow spectators, sharing their sweat, their breath, and unfortunately their parasites. The heat generated by this mass of humanity creates a microclimate that encourages the rapid multiplication of fleas, lice, and other insects that treat the crowd as an all-you-can-eat buffet. The entrance to the Colosseum itself is a marvel of Roman engineering designed to handle massive crowds while maintaining some semblance of order. The vomitoria, those brilliantly named passages that allow spectators to flow in and out of the arena, funnel the crowd through narrow corridors where the press of bodies becomes almost unbearable. The smell in these passages defies description, a combination of unwashed humanity, urine, vomit, and the lingering aroma of previous days' bloodshed that has soaked into the stone walls. Once inside the arena, the seating arrangements reflect Rome's rigid social hierarchy with brutal clarity. The wealthy occupy marble seats with cushions and awnings that provide protection from the sun, served by slaves who circulate with refreshments and scented cloths. The middle classes sit on stone benches that will become furnaces under the Mediterranean sun, while the poor stand in sections where the view is poor and the sun is merciless. The pre-game entertainment begins with animal hunts that serve as a warm-up for the main event. Exotic beasts from Africa and Asia are released into the arena to fight each other or be killed by professional hunters. The crowd's excitement builds with each death, creating an atmosphere of bloodlust that seems to physically manifest as a rising heat and humidity that makes breathing difficult. But it's during the gladiatorial combats themselves that the true hygiene nightmare begins. The arena floor, carefully covered with sand to absorb blood, becomes a canvas for displays of violence that would challenge even modern special effects. When gladiators are wounded, their blood doesn't politely stay contained within the arena. It sprays into the crowd, particularly those in the expensive front row seats. The wealthy spectators come prepared for this eventuality, bringing extra tunics and teams of slaves equipped with cleaning supplies. When blood spatters across your clothing or face, attendants immediately spring into action with cloths and oils to remove the stains before they set. This cleaning process becomes its own form of theatre, as wealthy Romans compete to demonstrate their preparedness and sophistication in handling the arena's messier moments. For the poor spectators in the upper sections, blood spatters are simply accepted as part of the experience. You wear your oldest clothes and hope for the best, knowing that any stains acquired during the games will become permanent reminders of the day's entertainment. Some enterprising Romans even consider gladiator blood to have magical properties, deliberately allowing it to remain on their clothing as a form of good luck charm. The crowd's reaction to particularly spectacular deaths creates its own hygiene challenges. When 50,000 Romans simultaneously cheer, gasp, or scream, the resulting release of breath, saliva, and other bodily fluids creates a visible mist that settles over the entire arena. This aerosol contains the accumulated diseases, parasites, and general biological hazards of the entire crowd, ensuring that attending the games becomes its own form of health lottery. The duration of the games, often lasting from morning until sunset, tests the limits of Roman bladder control and digestive fortitude. The wealthy have access to private facilities beneath the arena, but the poor must either leave their seats, losing their places in the process, or simply relieve themselves where they stand. The stone seats of the Colosseum become increasingly slippery and aromatic as the day progresses, creating conditions that would challenge even experienced sailors. The combination of heat, excitement, blood, and overcrowding frequently causes spectators to faint, vomit, or suffer other medical emergencies that add to the general hygiene chaos. The arena's medical staff, such as they are, focus primarily on the gladiators. Paying spectators are largely left to fend for themselves when overcome by the day's excitement. As the afternoon sun reaches its zenith, and the gladiatorial combat intensifies into a frenzy of blood and sand, a sudden hush falls over the Colosseum as trumpets announce the arrival of the ultimate Roman spectacle, the emperor himself. This transforms an already challenging hygiene situation into something approaching a national emergency, because when 50,000 Romans simultaneously attempt to make themselves presentable for their divine ruler, the results can only be described as organized chaos with a distinctly aromatic undertone. The imperial arrival protocol triggers a complex dance of preparation that affects every person in the arena, regardless of their social status or proximity to the imperial box. If you're among the wealthy spectators in the premium seating sections, the announcement means you have approximately 10 minutes to transform yourself from a blood-spattered arena enthusiast into a model of Roman dignity worthy of imperial notice. Your personal slaves spring into action with military precision, producing an arsenal of grooming supplies that would impress a professional beautician. The first priority is damage control, removing any visible blood spatters, wine stains, or other evidence of the day's entertainment from your clothing and person. Slaves armed with cloths soaked in scented water attack the stains with the desperation of soldiers defending a fortress, while others apply fresh oils and powders to restore your appearance to something approaching imperial standards. The process resembles emergency surgery performed by a team of cosmetic specialists working against an impossible deadline. But the real challenge comes in managing the collective hygiene crisis that affects the entire arena. 50,000 Romans who have been sitting in the sun for hours, eating questionable food, drinking wine, and witnessing spectacular violence, suddenly need to appear respectable for their emperor. The result is a mass grooming frenzy that strains the Colosseum's infrastructure to its breaking point. The public latrines beneath the arena, already overwhelmed by the day's normal traffic, become the sites of desperate battles as Romans attempt to relieve themselves and make basic repairs to their appearance before the imperial inspection. The lines for these facilities stretch for hundreds of yards, creating human traffic jams that would challenge modern urban planners. Those unable to wait resort to emergency measures that add new layers of aroma to the arena's already complex olfactory environment. The vendors who circulate through the crowd selling refreshments suddenly find themselves besieged by customers desperate to purchase anything that might improve their appearance or breath. Mint leaves, perfumed waters, and clean cloths become more valuable than gold as Romans bid frantically for the chance to achieve minimal respectability. The prices for these emergency grooming supplies inflate by the minute, creating an impromptu economy based on panic and imperial vanity. For the poor spectators in the upper sections, the emperor's arrival presents an impossible challenge. You can't afford emergency grooming supplies, you can't reach the overwhelmed public facilities, and you certainly can't leave your hard-won seat to attempt any serious hygiene improvements. Your strategy involves careful positioning to avoid imperial notice while attempting to clean yourself using whatever materials are available. Your own clothing, discarded food scraps, or in desperate cases your own saliva applied to strategic areas. The emperor's entrance into his box triggers a synchronized response from the crowd that creates its own hygiene complications. 50,000 Romans rising to their feet simultaneously generates a cloud of collective body odor that is visible from across the arena. The movement stirs up dust, debris, and various organic materials that have accumulated on the seats throughout the day, creating an atmospheric disturbance that challenges even the imperial box's elevated position. The imperial retinue itself represents the pinnacle of Roman grooming achievement, creating a stark contrast with the general population that emphasizes the gulf between divine ruler and mortal subjects. The emperor's personal appearance has been perfected by teams of specialists working for hours to achieve a look that suggests godlike perfection while remaining recognizably human. His clothing is spotless, his skin glows with health and expensive oils, and his hair appears to defy both gravity and the Mediterranean climate. But even imperial grooming has its limitations. The emperor must maintain his perfect appearance while sitting in the sun for hours, watching violent entertainment and acknowledging the cheers of thousands of sweating, unwashed subjects. His personal slaves work continuously to maintain his divine image, discreetly applying fresh powders, adjusting his clothing, and managing the various bodily functions that even gods cannot completely transcend. The imperial box itself is designed as a shrine to Roman hygiene achievement, featuring running water, private facilities, and air circulation systems that protect the emperor from direct contact with the arena's more challenging aromas. Slaves with fans create artificial breezes, while others burn incense and aromatic herbs to maintain an atmosphere worthy of divine presence. The result is a bubble of civilization floating above the chaos of the arena floor. The emperor's reactions to the games become the focus of intense scrutiny from the crowd, but his ability to maintain appropriate responses while managing his own hygiene needs requires skills that aren't taught in any military academy. Every gesture must appear spontaneous while being carefully calculated. Every expression must seem genuine while being perfectly controlled. The emperor cannot scratch an itch, adjust his clothing, or show any sign of the physical discomfort that affects every other person in the arena. As the gladiatorial combat reaches its climax, the emperor must decide the fate of defeated fighters while maintaining perfect imperial composure. The famous thumbs up or down gesture that determines life or death must be delivered with divine authority. Regardless of whether the emperor is suffering from heat exhaustion, digestive distress, or the thousand other ailments that plague mortal rulers forced to perform godlike perfection in public. As the games reach their bloody crescendo and the emperor's divine presence transforms the Colosseum into a theater of imperial judgment, you witness what might be the most challenging hygiene environment in human history. 50,000 Romans packed into a stone bowl under the Mediterranean sun. watching gladiators die while managing their own increasingly desperate bodily needs. This is where Roman civilization's pretensions to cleanliness collide head-on with the brutal reality of mass entertainment, creating conditions that would challenge even modern crowd control experts. If you're still maintaining your position as Gaius Spectaculus Maximus in the premium seating section, the Emperor's presence has transformed your day at the Games from a social event into a survival challenge. The imperial box elevated above the common seating creates a hierarchy of observation where you are simultaneously spectator and spectacle. Every reaction you display to the violence below is potentially being observed and judged by imperial eyes, requiring you to maintain perfect composure while your body rebels against hours of heat, wine, and sensory overload. The arena floor itself has become a canvas painted in increasingly vivid shades of red as the day's entertainment progresses. The sand that was carefully spread this morning to absorb blood has reached its saturation point, creating muddy patches that spray crimson droplets into the front rows with each gladiatorial maneuver. The wealthy spectators in these prime seats find themselves literally baptized in the blood of the entertainment, requiring constant attention from their slaves to maintain any semblance of cleanliness. But the blood spatters are only part of the hygiene nightmare unfolding in the arena. The crowd's excitement manifests in ways that challenge both dignity and sanitation. When a particularly spectacular death occurs, the collective roar of 50,000 voices creates a visible mist of saliva, breath, and other bodily fluids that settles over the entire structure like a human rain cloud. This biological precipitation carries with it the accumulated diseases, parasites, and general unwholesomeness of the entire gathering. The Emperor's judgment calls more those dramatic thumbs up or down gestures that determine whether defeated gladiators live or die, trigger massive crowd responses that create their own atmospheric disturbances. When death is decreed, the cheer that erupts from the stands generates enough airborne moisture to actually change the humidity levels inside the Colosseum. When mercy is shown, the collective gasp of surprise creates a vacuum effect that draws dust and debris up from the arena floor into the breathing space of the spectators. For the poor spectators in the upper reaches of the amphitheater, the day has become an endurance test that pushes human dignity to its absolute limits. The stone seats, heated by hours of Mediterranean sun, have become furnaces that cook the unfortunate Romans who can't afford better accommodations. The heat generated by thousands of bodies packed together creates a microclimate that would challenge a modern sauna, with temperatures that make breathing difficult and thinking nearly impossible. The lack of adequate facilities for the masses has created a crisis of epic proportions. The public latrines, designed to handle normal traffic, have been overwhelmed since the morning's first animal hunts. The lines for these facilities now stretch through multiple levels of the Colosseum, creating a secondary entertainment as desperate Romans negotiate, bribe, and occasionally fight for access to basic sanitation. Those unable to wait have resorted to creative solutions that add new dimensions to the arena's aromatic profile. Empty wine amphoras are pressed into service as emergency chamber pots, while secluded corners and stairwells become impromptu relief stations. The Colosseum's impressive drainage system, designed to handle rainwater and cleaning operations, is being tested by substances its engineers never anticipated. The Emperor's elevated position provides him with the best view of both the gladiatorial combat and the growing hygiene crisis affecting his subjects. From his marble throne, he can observe the full spectrum of Roman society in various states of distress, from wealthy senators desperately trying to maintain their dignity while blood-stained and overheated, to poor citizens who have abandoned all pretense of cleanliness in favor of survival. The imperial retinue works frantically to maintain the illusion of divine perfection while their emperor presides over what is essentially a controlled humanitarian disaster. Slaves with fans attempt to create cooling breezes, while others apply fresh oils and powders to counteract the effects of heat and stress. The emperor's own bodily functions become matters of state security, requiring elaborate protocols to ensure that divine dignity is maintained even during the most basic human necessities. As individual gladiatorial combats conclude and new fighters enter the arena, the accumulated biological debris of the day's entertainment creates increasingly challenging conditions for both performers and spectators. The sand on the arena floor, originally pristine and golden, has become a crimson mud that splashes with each footstep and weapon strike. This bloody mixture flies into the crowd with each dramatic combat maneuver, ensuring that even the most expensive seats become casualties in the day's entertainment. The gladiators themselves, fighting for their lives while covered in the blood of previous combats, represent the ultimate fusion of Roman spectacle and hygiene horror. Their bodies, already scarred from previous battles, become canvases for new wounds that spray arterial decoration across the arena. The oil and sand that coat their skin, originally applied for protection and grip, create a paste that preserves and displays every cut, bruise, and puncture wound in vivid detail. Between individual combats, slaves rush onto the arena floor with rakes and fresh sand, attempting to prepare the space for the next bout. But their efforts are largely cosmetic. The deeper layers of sand are thoroughly saturated with blood, sweat, and other fluids that no amount of raking can completely refresh. The arena becomes an archaeological record of the day's violence, with each layer of sand preserving the evidence of previous deaths. As the sun begins its descent toward the Seven Hills and the gladiatorial games finally draw to their blood-soaked conclusion, you face perhaps the most challenging aspect of Roman social life, maintaining the appearance of cultured sophistication while your body and soul reel from hours of witnessing systematic violence, all while managing the accumulated hygiene disasters that have befallen every person in the Colosseum. This is where Roman civilization reveals its most profound contradiction. The expectation that citizens will transition seamlessly from cheering for human dismemberment to discussing poetry and philosophy as if nothing unusual has occurred. If you're Gaius Spectaculus Maximus, the wealthy grain merchant who has somehow survived this ordeal in the premium seating section, your immediate challenge involves transforming yourself from a blood-spattered arena enthusiast back into a sophisticated member of Roman society worthy of the evening's cultural obligations. Your clothing, despite the best efforts of your personal slaves, bears the unmistakable evidence of the day's entertainment: wine stains, blood spatters, and the general grime that accumulates when 50,000 people spend hours sweating together in a stone amphitheater. The post-game social ritual begins even before you leave your seat, as wealthy Romans engage in the elaborate theater of pretending that the afternoon's carnage was merely a refined cultural experience comparable to attending a dramatic recitation or musical performance. Conversations immediately shift to discussions of gladiatorial technique, the historical precedents for particular combat styles, and the philosophical implications of courage in the face of death. The blood-soaked reality of what you've just witnessed is transformed through linguistic alchemy into an intellectual exercise worthy of cultured discourse. Your personal slaves work frantically to prepare you for the evening's social obligations, which will begin almost immediately with a series of dinners, receptions, and cultural events that assume you possess the dignity and cleanliness appropriate to Roman high society. Fresh clothing is produced from the supplies kept in your litter, while specialized servants apply emergency cosmetics to conceal the effects of hours in the sun surrounded by humanity's less fragrant representatives. The challenge of cleaning blood spatters from your skin and hair requires techniques that Roman slaves have perfected through years of experience with arena attending masters. Special oils designed to dissolve dried blood are applied with cloths that have been soaked in wine and aromatic herbs. The process stings the sun-damaged skin and creates an aroma that combines the metallic scent of blood with the cloying sweetness of expensive perfumes, resulting in a fragrance that's uniquely Roman in its bizarre complexity. But the physical cleaning is only the beginning of your transformation back into civilized society. You must also perform the psychological cleansing required to discuss art, literature, and philosophy, as if you haven't just spent hours cheering for human death. This mental transition requires skills that are taught to wealthy Roman children as part of their basic education. The ability to compartmentalize experiences and maintain different personas for different social contexts. Meanwhile, if you're Quintus Plebeius Communis, our construction worker who managed to witness the games from the cheapest seats, your post-arena experience involves different but equally challenging hygiene hurdles. You have no slaves to assist with cleaning, no spare clothing to change into, and no litter to protect you during the journey home through Rome's increasingly dangerous evening streets. Your strategy involves finding a public fountain where you can attempt some basic cleaning while avoiding the attention of criminals who prey on arena goers carrying any visible wealth. The walk home becomes a gauntlet of hygiene challenges that reflect the broader problems of Roman urban life after dark. The streets, which bustled with legitimate commerce during the day, now serve as open sewers for the city's waste disposal needs. Romans empty chamber pots from upper-story windows with casual disregard for pedestrians below, creating an environment where avoiding human waste becomes a test of reflexes and luck. The public fountains that provide clean water during daylight hours become contaminated by evening use, as desperate citizens use them for everything from drinking water to washing blood-stained clothing, to relieving themselves when the public latrines become too crowded or dangerous to approach. The water that flows from these fountains carries the accumulated biological contributions of the day's users, creating a liquid that's technically water but requires considerable faith to actually drink. For both rich and poor, the evening's cultural obligations create additional layers of performance anxiety. Roman society expects its citizens to transition smoothly from the brutal entertainment of the arena to the refined pleasures of intellectual discourse, artistic appreciation, and sophisticated dining. This requires not just physical cleaning, but psychological transformation that challenges even the most experienced social performers. The wealthy attend dinner parties where conversations about gladiatorial combat must be framed in terms of historical precedent, military strategy, or philosophical inquiry into the nature of courage and death. Direct references to the blood, gore, and human suffering that formed the afternoon's entertainment are considered crude and inappropriate for civilized company. The art lies in discussing the experience while sanitizing it of its most disturbing elements. The poor face different but equally demanding cultural expectations. They're expected to return to their families and communities, as if spending the day watching human beings kill each other for entertainment is a normal and healthy social activity. Children who ask about the games must be given responses that frame the violence in terms of honor, courage, and civic duty, transforming state-sponsored murder into moral education. The psychological toll of this constant performance and the need to appear civilized while participating in barbarism, to maintain dignity while covered in blood, to discuss philosophy while reeking of human waste. Concrete stresses that Roman society acknowledges only obliquely. The high rates of alcoholism, the popularity of mind-altering substances, and the frequent outbreaks of irrational violence among even the most cultured Romans may reflect the accumulated psychological damage of constantly switching between civilization and savagery. As evening approaches and the social obligations of Roman cultural life beckon, both rich and poor must somehow transform themselves from arena animals back into civilized human beings, carrying with them the memories and aromas of the day's entertainment while pretending that nothing unusual has occurred. As the shadows lengthen across the eternal city, and you finally return to whatever passes for home in your corner of the Roman world, the accumulated toll of living according to Roman hygiene standards becomes impossible to ignore. This is the moment of reckoning, when the elaborate performance of civilization gives way to the brutal reality of what all those beauty treatments, cleansing rituals, and social obligations have actually done to your body. The mirror, whether it's polished bronze for the wealthy or a still puddle for the poor, reflects not the godlike perfection that Roman culture promises, but the gradual destruction that comes from pursuing cleanliness through methods that would horrify modern toxicologists. If you're Marcus Deterioratus slowly, a successful merchant whose wealth has afforded him access to the finest Roman beauty treatments for the past 20 years, your evening examination reveals the true cost of luxury. Your face, artificially pale from decades of lead-based cosmetics, shows the telltale signs of heavy metal poisoning, a slight tremor in your hands, dark lines along your gums, and a persistent headache that no amount of wine can completely eliminate. The makeup that once gave you the ethereal complexion of a marble statue has gradually accumulated in your tissues, creating a slow-motion catastrophe that will eventually kill you with the same efficiency as any gladiator's sword. Your teeth, subjected to years of abrasive cleaning powders and exotic whitening treatments, are loose in their sockets and cause constant pain. The ground pearls and crushed pumice that promised to give you a senatorial smile have gradually worn away the enamel, leaving the underlying structures vulnerable to decay and infection. Your breath, despite the daily applications of expensive mouth treatments, carries the sweet metallic scent that experienced Romans recognize as the smell of approaching death. Your skin, scraped daily with bronze strigils and treated with caustic beauty preparations, bears the accumulated damage of decades of aggressive grooming. Scars from overzealous scraping crisscross your back and arms, while chronic skin conditions caused by toxic cosmetics create a patchwork of irritation that no amount of expensive oils can soothe. The very treatments designed to make you more attractive have gradually transformed you into a living testament to the dangers of Roman vanity. But perhaps most alarming of all are the internal symptoms that Roman physicians struggle to understand or treat. Your digestive system, assaulted by years of exotic foods, experimental wines, and medicinal preparations containing heavy metals, stages frequent rebellions that leave you weak and nauseous. Your joints ache from inflammation caused by the various toxic substances that have accumulated in your tissues over decades of pursuing Roman beauty standards. Meanwhile, if you're Quintus Parasitus Maximus, a poor citizen whose hygiene options have been limited to whatever free or cheap alternatives are available, your health problems are different but equally severe. The public baths that you depend on for cleanliness have become sources of infection, exposing you to diseases that spread rapidly through the contaminated water systems. Your skin bears the evidence of multiple parasitic infections picked up from shared facilities, while your digestive system hosts a collection of worms and other organisms that would fascinate modern parasitologists. The cheap oils and cleaning products available to the poor often contain ingredients that are even more dangerous than the expensive alternatives used by the wealthy. Unregulated mixtures of animal fat, plant extracts and various minerals create cosmetic preparations that can cause chemical burns, allergic reactions, and systemic poisoning. Your attempts to achieve some semblance of Roman cleanliness have left you with permanent scars and chronic health conditions that will follow you to your grave. The water you drink from public fountains carries its own collection of hazards, filtered through lead pipes that gradually poison everyone who depends on Rome's impressive aqueduct system. The same engineering marvel that brings fresh water from distant mountains also delivers a steady dose of heavy metals that accumulate in your tissues over time, causing neurological damage that manifests as confusion, irritability, and premature aging. Perhaps most tragically, both rich and poor Romans suffer from the psychological costs of living in a society that demands impossible standards of cleanliness while providing only methods that cause more harm than good. The constant awareness that your body is betraying you, that the very treatments designed to make you beautiful are slowly killing you, creates a form of existential anxiety that permeates Roman culture. The wealthy cope with this knowledge through elaborate denial systems, convincing themselves that their expensive treatments are somehow different from the crude methods used by the poor. They consult physicians who prescribe even more exotic and dangerous remedies, creating cycles of treatment that accelerate their decline while providing the illusion of sophisticated medical care. The poor, lacking access to such comforting delusions, often abandon hygiene altogether once they realize that their attempts at cleanliness are making them sicker. This creates a bifurcated society where the wealthy slowly poison themselves with expensive treatments while the poor succumb to diseases that could be prevented by effective hygiene practices. Roman physicians, working with limited understanding of anatomy, chemistry, and disease transmission, often prescribe treatments that worsen the very conditions they're meant to cure. The medical texts that guide their practice recommend therapies involving toxic substances, dangerous procedures, and magical thinking that transforms healing into a form of elaborate suicide. The system's costs extend beyond individual health to affect the entire structure of Roman society. The shortened lifespans caused by toxic beauty treatments mean that experienced leaders, skilled craftsmen, and knowledgeable citizens die prematurely, creating constant disruption in social and economic systems. The chronic illness caused by Roman hygiene practices reduces productivity and creates enormous demands for medical care that the empire's resources struggle to meet. Even the famous Roman engineering, including the aqueducts and sewers that are symbols of imperial achievement, contributes to the health crisis through design flaws that modern sanitation experts would recognize immediately. Lead pipes, contaminated water sources, and sewage systems that create perfect breeding grounds for disease-carrying insects turn Roman infrastructure into a delivery system for chronic illness. And so, as night finally falls over the 7 hills and the eternal city settles into its restless slumber, you find yourself confronting one of history's most profound ironies, the civilization that gave us law, literature, engineering marvels. And the very concept of empire somehow managed to transform the simple act of getting clean into an elaborate form of slow-motion suicide. The Romans who could build roads that lasted millennia and aqueducts that still function today never quite figured out that rubbing lead on your face or washing your teeth with urine might not be the best ideas. As you lie in your bed, whether it's stuffed with swan feathers or straw crawling, with insects in you, you're forced to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that has run like a toxic thread through every aspect of this day. Roman hygiene was simultaneously the most sophisticated and most dangerous cleanliness system ever devised by human beings. They had hot running water, but filled it with diseases. They had elaborate beauty treatments that slowly poisoned their users. They had magnificent public baths that served as incubators for parasites. They had dental care that destroyed teeth and skin treatments that caused cancer. The great paradox of Roman civilization becomes crystal clear in these quiet nighttime moments. Their relentless pursuit of cleanliness made them dirtier, their obsession with beauty made them uglier, and their dedication to health made them sicker. They created a society where the wealthy slowly poisoned themselves with expensive treatments while the poor died from diseases that proper hygiene could have prevented. It was a system that perfectly captured the Roman genius for turning simple problems into complex disasters. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Roman hygiene isn't its spectacular failures, it's how familiar those failures seem when viewed from our modern perspective. The Romans' willingness to ignore obvious health risks in pursuit of social status, their faith in expensive treatments over common sense, their preference for complex solutions over simple ones, and their ability to create systems that benefited no one while harming everyone. Well, these tendencies haven't exactly disappeared from human civilization. The Roman who rubbed lead makeup on his face to achieve the perfect pale complexion wasn't so different from modern people who inject botulism into their faces for beauty. The Roman who cleaned his teeth with abrasive powders that destroyed enamel shares something with those who undergo dangerous cosmetic procedures for perfect smiles. The Roman obsession with hair removal, exotic treatments, and maintaining impossible standards of physical perfection finds echoes in every age that values appearance over health. What makes the Roman story particularly poignant is how close they came to getting it right. They understood the importance of regular bathing. They recognized the social value of cleanliness, and they built infrastructure that could have supported genuinely healthy hygiene practices. But their inability to separate effective techniques from dangerous ones, their confusion of complexity with sophistication, and their willingness to ignore evidence in favor of tradition created a system that defeated its own purposes. The Romans thought they were the pinnacle of civilization, and in many ways they were. But their hygiene practices reveal the dangerous seduction of believing that more expensive, more elaborate, and more painful treatments must necessarily be better than simple, safe, and effective ones. They fell victim to the eternal human tendency to confuse suffering with virtue, complexity with intelligence, and expense with quality. As sleep finally claims you in your Roman bed, surrounded by the sounds of the eternal city falls, the distant splash of chamber pots, the scurrying of rats, the coughs of citizens slowly succumbing to lead poisoning, you might reflect on how the greatest empire in human history was brought low, not by barbarian invasions or economic collapse, but by the accumulated weight of a million small bad decisions about how to stay clean. In the end, the Romans created a civilization that could conquer the world but couldn't conquer body odor, that could build pantheons but couldn't build a decent toothbrush, that could rule an empire spanning 3 continents but couldn't figure out that maybe, just maybe, washing your mouth with piss wasn't the path to dental health. Sweet dreams, citizen. Try not to think about what's crawling in your mattress.